All right, time for that update, boss lady.
All right. Well, where do I even begin? This has been a wild week and it hasn't even started. The JP margin call default has been confirmed. It was JP Morgan that missed its margin call on silver commodities. I guess the first thing I should explain to people is that there is a difference between paper silver and actual silver, which is something I've been bringing everyone's attention to for a very long time. It's the difference between a cat and a picture of a cat. Unfortunately, in the years since the 1930s, when this was illegalized, and today, when it has been allowed to take place again, the trading of paper futures in various commodities has gotten out of control and resulted in an entire derivatives market that, among the big bank players, affects virtually everything on the planet because they have contracts and relationships with all these other banks and financial institutions, including brokerage firms. And most importantly, pension funds. Now, because pension funds are a specially protected class of investments and business obligations, pardon me, a lot of things get shoved into pension funds by state operators that technically should not be in pension funds. And this is because they're protected. I am so sorry. I did not mean to have a sneeze attack on air tonight, but anyway, because they're a protected class.
Welcome back.
Oh, what happened?
We completely lost you about 3 minutes ago.
Okay, well, is that better?
It is now.
Okay, all right, let's begin again. I'm explaining why pension funds are a specially protected class of obligations in a bankruptcy. If a company goes bankrupt, the pension funds take a top level position in the bankruptcy hierarchy of creditors so that people don't lose their retirements. And then the state does not get those people on its rolls as people being on the public dole when actually they should be enjoying their retirement, which was guaranteed to them by a franchise corporation, right? So pension funds have a protected position in any kind of bankruptcy liquidation sort of situation. And for that reason, they have a preferred status in terms of rat-rolling money. So you often see things associated with management of corporate pension funds that are kind of bizarre and weird and really shouldn't be allowed. But we see things like funding pension funds 35 years in advance, so that the managers today are taking money out and accepting funding for pensions that won't be paid until 35 years in advance. And all of this kind of bookkeeping and encumberancing is a means for them to hide income and to have investment income that really should not be appropriated in the first place. This is one of the ways that they do it. Okay, I'm explaining this because
Oh, it's going to be one of those nights, people. I am sincerely sorry for this. Seems that the weather is out to get us. For those that do not know, anyone who wanted to donate to Anna, does not currently have my Cash App or my Revolut. You can happily email me at the email on your screen, and I will send that information over to you. Welcome back. The snow is messing with you. Only about 30 seconds that time.
Anyway, long story short, a lot of people in Germany lost their pensions over what happened this weekend. Thousands, tens of thousands of Germans who are at retirement age or who are already retired lost their pensions. Now, think about that in terms of what it would mean to you and people that you know if suddenly they didn't have the pension that they worked and earned and entrusted to their employers all these many years. Say that all of a sudden people that worked for the city of Manchester, Massachusetts, suddenly had no pension. What would happen if somebody who worked for the school for 40 years had no pension? What would happen if people who are on Social Security suddenly had no pension, no benefits? Well, this is the kind of thing that happens when you have a default by a very, very major bank player that, despite being solvent, is not liquid. Okay? Now, what happened this past weekend is going to have reverberations for a long time to come. But the most immediate impact is going to be political, as those who have lost their pensions because of this and people who have suffered other irremediable harm as a result of it come back on the state, either politically or commercially, demanding satisfaction of the debt that these organizations owe them. And fortunately or unfortunately, we already have the claims against these organizations. Now, something that most Americans don't know is that the American Bar Association owns a very large proportion of the Fortune 500 companies and also the banks, the British maritime banks that you're all familiar with and that you've been doing business with for years. So the American Bar Association and an organization known as the Northern Trust is very much involved in the middle of all of the chicanery involving pensions and future obligations resulting from pensions and what are called social insurance programs like Social Security in America or the sin taxes in Canada. So anyway, to make a long story short, the failure to meet the silver margin call is just kind of the beginning of a potential upset in funds which are dependent on not only liquidity, but on deliverability of actual commodity assets, not just trading contracts on physical assets that are assumed to exist and assumed to be available. Now, China, which had been producing about a quarter of the world's yearly silver supply, suddenly decided, pretty much out of the blue over the last couple of months, that it was no longer going to produce and sell silver. it was going to keep all of its silver for its own use, which, if you're China, might make some sense because remember that China has a preponderance of the electronics business of the entire world, and they have contracts that they have to meet that require silver as part of the product, the end product that they're selling, whether it's electronic parts or um, silicone chips that have silver components or any other product that's electronic that China is producing is going to use silver. So perhaps China legitimately got alarmed by the lack of silver production and said, we have to ensure our own resources of silver to make sure that we can meet our production contracts for all these other products. So as a result, China has taken a quarter of all available physical silver out of the market and isn't even bothering to meet the contracts, the delivery contracts that it had already signed with Western industries and silver consumers. So suddenly, poof, there goes 25% of the silver supply, the actual physical silver supply. Then China is going out and they are buying up every futures production contract that they can find from other countries that are silver producers like Peru. And in this way, they are, in essence, quote unquote, cornering the market on silver, although it remains to be seen if that's really their object or if they're just kind of hedging their bets and making sure that they can meet their own contracts for delivery of products that use silver. All right. Into the midst of all of this, we have Donald Trump. There are a number of reasons why an attack on Venezuela would be an obvious move for Donald Trump to make as the commander of a British Crown Corporation entity that is in desperate need of raw material supplies, including oil and silver. Silver is a strategic metal and it is used in a lot of different applications industrially. So it's very important. It's right up there with oil. Now, it's true that gold can replace silver and is arguably often a better metal to use than silver, but it's also obviously more expensive than silver. Okay, so there's the quid pro quo on that. So with the whole silver situation being what it is and the deliverability on silver contracts being what it is, Venezuela made a great target for some kind of political overthrow or whatever you want to call it, regime change that would benefit U.S., not American per se, but U.S. interests in the commodity markets and in the markets that will produce actual products. So both oil and silver are of critical importance to the U.S. hegemony, and the U.S., meaning Trump's whole giddy up, is suffering on two counts. The first count is loss of Saudi Arabian oil, as they had an exclusive contract for 50 years, and that's how we got the petrodollar. That contract lapsed and came to an end in, I believe, July of this past year. and other countries began competing for Saudi oil. And as a result, more Saudi crude oil is going to other destinations, not just here, not just the US anymore. And that leaves our refinery capacity endangered because although most Americans never realize this, our pig in a poke here was refined oil products. We took the crude oil shipped over here and refined it into a plethora of refined oil products. And then we resold those refined oil products into the world market for profit. It's a value added business for us. And our refinery system is geared up to produce a plethora of these products all along the southern tier of states. So we have these gigantic refineries that are set up to produce value-added refined oil products using Saudi crude oil. And without the Saudi crude oil, that leaves our refinery capacity at risk, which leaves our position in the market for refined oil products at risk, and also to some extent leaves us with a possible defense capability crippled, because if we don't have the raw feedstocks to make the refined oil products, then we may not be able to provide for our own needs, much less have it ready to sell to other people on a worldwide market. So the loss of an exclusive on Saudi crude oil was already a major stressor, okay? And then the whole situation with the silver market going sideways and no longer being able to rely upon contractual supply obligations from China, and also some severe competition from China for remaining silver commodity supplies, has led the Trump administration into a situation where taking over Venezuela in one way or another was a very attractive proposition as a business move, not as a political move, but to gain control of Venezuelan oil and Venezuelan silver, both was an obvious objective for the US Incorporated, right? Now, I have a certain amount of chronic skepticism involved with anything that goes on in the political realm, because for many, many years, it has been considered a game or a stage play. Remember William Shakespeare back in the 1580s saying, all the world's a stage? Well, it really truly is. And it's often hard to tell what's real and what's staged. It's not very plausible that the US military just walked in and arrested Nicolas Maduro and his wife and took them into custody and whisked them away without even a shot being fired, right? But it becomes much more plausible if you consider that Maduro was a US or MI6 plant who was placed in power by the CIA and MI6, and who was basically just playing the part of a spoiler and is actually a Western asset who needed to be removed to bring in a new actor or a new cast of actors, okay? Now, oil in Venezuela was largely produced and developed by American oil companies, in particular Chevron. Chevron isn't the biggest player in the market, but they're an old player, and they're certainly not stupid. So the money that they put into developing Venezuelan oil was probably returned to them within the first year, and they probably started making profit within 2 years of actually producing oil. And they had a run up, and then Venezuela nationalized all that infrastructure that Chevron had built there. Now, that's a loss to Chevron, certainly, but more importantly, when Venezuela began selling the oil to other parties, instead of shipping the crude oil to the U.S., it harmed the refining capacity and the profitability of the value-added products that our refineries can produce. Now, you take this whole thing together in your mind and you realize that both oil and silver are prime commodities that the U.S. needs and can't guarantee, mainly because it hasn't developed its own natural resources. And this takes us back to 1908 and Theodore Roosevelt's administration. Everybody who remembers Teddy sees this big walrus mustachioed guy who, had a overhanging gut and khaki pants and fancied himself as the great white hunter. Well, one of the most enduring legacies of his administration was natural resource conservancy. And everybody thinks of this in terms of national parks and wildlife conservation programs and preserving natural environments and all of this feel-good stuff that's wonderful and is going to save the environment and the resources for future generations, right? Well, what if I told you that that was just a very cynical top dressing to make Roosevelt's conservation program seem to be beneficial and acceptable? What if I told you that, in effect, the real thrust of Teddy Roosevelt's conservation program had nothing to do with national parks or preserving species or anything of that sort, but was just a popular sop, a top dressing to justify what in essence is a natural resource control mechanism that was used to benefit Roosevelt's business cronies who already had businesses and mines and extraction enterprises that were already in process. They were restricting access to natural resources that would then compete with their pre-existing businesses. They were doing that in this country, and they were at the same time making it a national policy of their corporation that they would seek out resources in other parts of the world and buy those resources at pennies on the dollar and use those resources first, so that we had essentially cashiered our own natural resources and ensured our own non-development of those resources while taking advantage of everybody else's natural resources and using their natural resources to produce products that we would then use to create value-added products, and we would then be benefiting not only in that we kept our own natural resources rat-holed and not competing with our pre-existing businesses, but then also would have the value-added business coming off of it so that we could make a profit both in what we didn't expend and in what we added value to. Now, this is a very cagey kind of natural resource policy. And in 1908, it was probably as good or better natural resource policy than any of the other corporations that were masquerading as governments came up with. So since 1908, that's the way it's been. And it essentially cranks down to, we'll buy everybody else's natural resources for pennies on a dollar. We will create value-added products from those natural resources and profit ourselves primarily from the value-added nature of what we've contributed. And we will rat hole our own resources away and not develop them. And this has been the story since 1908. Well, it is now 2025. And, you know, both Roosevelt and his cronies are long since dead and gone. It's a different world. It's a much more connected world. It's a much more savvy world in certain respects. And what we see now is sort of a trifecta of effects coming to bear on that natural resource policy. And it leaves us in a situation where, although we have some of the richest silver deposits in the Western world and in the world in general, they're not developed. We have very rich silver deposits throughout the southwestern United States up until into Montana. We have very, very rich silver, gold, and rare earth mineral deposits in Alaska. And yet nothing has been done to develop these. And in many cases, little enough has been done to identify the location of these resources. So when you say that, you know, I need 10 million ounces of silver to create electronic parts, batteries, and internal control mechanisms for fighter jets, we don't have $10 million or 10 million ounces of silver already mined. We have it. We have vast resources of silver, but it isn't mined. And it hasn't been mined because of this conservation policy set in place by the Roosevelt administration over 100 years ago. And so it would take perhaps 5 years, is a reasonable amount of time, for us to develop enough silver mining potential and enough actual silver product to meet our own needs. We've got about a 4-year time period where we have to close that gap. And by the attack on the Venezuelan, I won't say the country, but the Venezuelan government officials, they are basically trying to ensure that they will be able to greatly influence the ultimate destination of Venezuelan oil, to assure that they have new crude oil sources which are closer to our refineries and therefore more competitive in the marketplace than Saudi oil, okay? Plus, they took over one of the richest silver deposits in the Western world and are guaranteed, I believe, something like 47 million ounces of silver from just one Venezuelan mine. So they're also going after the silver issue and going after Venezuelan silver deposits. There's number 2 in the listing of commodities that are of interest to the United States Incorporated and to Donald Trump in particular, as a guarantee that we will continue to be able to benefit from value-added oil products, continue to have the products we need within this country domestically, and also be able to meet our needs for defense contracts and things like fighter jets. Okay. So in all of this, the U.S. Incorporated is very, very, I guess the word is self-protective. Okay. They are not being overly honest about any of this. I meet very few people who realize that we're still following a natural resource policy set in place in 1908. And as a result, very few people are questioning whether or not we should be following a natural resource policy that is more than 100 years old. And recently we've had another step back into history, which was references made to the Monroe Doctrine, which basically is not allowed by any constitution, by any federal constitution. All of the constitutions, all three of them, say the same thing. We have a contract with the British Territorial Company, now corporation, calling itself the United States of America, to provide certain stipulated services. Those services involve the defense of our country. And specifically, knowingly, literally, our forefathers meant defense of our borders and defense of our shipping on the high seas and navigable inland waterways. This is explicitly what they were talking about, and it is stipulated in the constitutions themselves and in the treaties that gave rise to the constitutions that implement those treaties, that what our founding fathers were talking about as protection or defense of our country involved land defense of our borders and our security within those borders, and security of our commercial shipping on the high seas and navigable inland waterways. All right, that's what the Brits are supposed to be providing. That and nothing else. They are not supposed to be rampaging all over the world, setting up 950 military bases in virtually every country on the planet, and acting as the world's policemen. They're not supposed to be fronting the defense costs of all the countries in Western Europe as an excuse to continue occupying those countries and insinuating corporate government franchises of the USA Inc. as the governments of countries like Germany and Belgium. Okay, they're not supposed to be doing that. They're not supposed to be rampaging around and creating incidents where the mercenary forces that they created during the Lincoln administration can be used to go in pursuing commercial mercenary objectives, I should say. They're not supposed to be doing that. That's not the intent of the contract. The intent of the contract is purely, simply defense of our country and its borders and defense of our commercial shipping on the high seas and navigable inland waterways. Anything above and beyond that was never agreed to by the American states. It was never ratified. There was never any agreement saying that the Americans would pay for any of this. What they did is they just overstepped their contract, made a declaration, in this case, the Monroe Doctrine, which is a doctrine of their corporation, not of our country, right? And because nobody was in session to lift their hand and say, hey, wait a minute, we didn't agree to pay for you, quote unquote, defending us by fighting people in Somalia. We didn't agree for you to have an extraterritorial mission in Uganda. We didn't define defense as, poking your nose into Russian affairs. Because there was nobody and nothing that was in session to object, they just arbitrarily started doing all this stuff that was not part of their contract, their original contract with us. And then assuming that by our silence, we agreed to this, they have charged us for their definition of defense. Okay, so they define defense as putting nuclear warheads in France. Okay, they define our defense as paying for all of the defense of Canada's airspace. And I can guarantee you that Joe Average American is sitting up and going, what? What? Why isn't Canada paying for its own defense of its own airspace? Why are we paying for it? How does that become our defense expense? Okay, I can guarantee you that Joe Average American is sitting up and going, how is funding a submarine base in the Seychelles in the middle of the Indian Ocean dedicated to defending India part of American defense expenses? How does that defend our country? What does that have to do with the price of beans in China? And you know damn well that John Adams and Tom Jefferson were not sitting there thinking of defense in those terms when they signed the contracts, right? Or the state citizens who actually signed the constitutions either. When they said defense, they meant defense of this country, of our terra firma, of our borders, of our states. They did not mean defense of the entire freaking world on the presumption that if something happened in Japan, it was going to affect us, okay? And this is what the Monroe Doctrine stipulates. We had problems with Barbary pirates taking out some of our ships. Well, okay, this is where the British Navy is supposed to come in and protect us. Did they? No. Instead, they started an entire policing type action and went into Morocco and Sudan and various other countries and created this entire force that operated for many years within their country on the pretense that they were defending America. They weren't defending America. They weren't even close to defending America. They did not keep within their stipulated jurisdiction on the high seas and navigable inland waterways. They did not treat it as a matter of piracy. They expanded the entire thing out so that they could try to justify American defense as the excuse to be perpetually at war, perpetually racking up war-related expenses, and perpetually charging that off against the American taxpayers. So if it comes as a big surprise to you that you have been fronting the expense of 96% of Western Europe's defense costs since 1946, it's time to wake up and realize how many billions upon billions of dollars have been devoted to this outrageously twisted redefinition of what defense of America means. And of course, the U.S. subcontractors are like cats and cream. They have an unlimited call on your resources to pursue all of these quote unquote defense activities throughout the entire world. And their excuse for this is the Monroe Doctrine, which they wheedled into place at a time when our government was not in session and was not able to say no. So now we've said no. Now we've lifted our hand and said, hey, we're in session, and this, Monroe defense stuff has nothing to do with us. If you want to continue to be war privateers and want to conduct war for profit, by golly, you're going to have to fund the expense of it yourselves, because it has nothing to do with defending this country, nor does it have anything legitimate to do with defending our shipping, our commercial shipping on the high seas and navigable inland waterways. All right, so just forget the Monroe Doctrine as far as the Americans and the American states are concerned. We're not paying for it. That's not the defense that we ordered. And you're going to have to pay for any expenses that you incur under this new definition of defense that you have self-interestedly proposed and promoted under the Monroe Doctrine. Well, suddenly what that does is it means that Mr. Trump's corporation, doing business as the United States of America, LLC, or the United States of America Foundation, or the United States of America Cooperative, or the United States of America, you see the point, has got to bear the expense of all these far-flung, quote-unquote, defense activities, which actually don't have anything to do with defending this country or its borders or even its commercial interests, but instead have to do with funding defense contractors and mercenary pay and benefits and salvage operations for the British Empire. And even as we saw in Vietnam, defending things like French rubber plantations in Vietnam. And all of this stuff was never anticipated by the Americans when they signed their contract for defense services from the British Empire. Anyway, now you're beginning to get a taste, a view of how we have been soaked to pay for all of these quote-unquote defense costs that actually have nothing to do with defending our country and have everything to do with providing support to cronies and bulking up defense spending for defense contractors. And it is still going on today. And the same kinds of really kind of lawless, skating on the edge kinds of activities have been engaged in by the same mercenaries that have been created by the Abraham Lincoln administration that converted our respectable, honorable national military into a private mercenary force, okay? Click that into your brain bank, okay? They're still rampaging around the world under the pretense that they are our military, which they are when they're actually serving that contract, but which has actually gone into business for itself, you see. We created the monster for the specific purpose of providing our service needs under our service contract, and they have tried to evade their obligations to us under that service contract, as well as going into business for themselves and trying to redefine all these extra activities as defending our country so that they could charge us for their investment costs in all of this privateering that they've been doing all over the world. So, for example, they go into Mali and they bully the local politicians and they pay them off and they get resource extraction contracts that allow them to go into Mali and dig gold and diamonds and whatever else they can find and take advantage of Mali and all the people in the country under the pretense that they did it for us and for our defense. And so all of the expense of their incursion into Mali is chalked up to defense contracts and defense expenses for America, when it actually has nothing to do with defending America, when it actually has to do with British territorial greed and colonialism using us like a sock puppet. All right? So they've been charging off all of their business expenses because they're a mercenary organization, right? They've been charging off all of their expenses to us as defense expenses, when in fact it has nothing to do with defending America. And they will charge us for their expenses and for their incursion into Venezuela. And they will say that they were defending us against, drug cartels that were being run out of Venezuela. What they will neglect to tell you is that those drug cartels are being created, managed, and paid by the CIA and MI6. And that it is just a very lucrative income stream for the British Empire, which should not even exist anymore. It's a colonialist rack and slack job, is what it's called, just like they did it with the Chinese and the Opium Wars. Fentanyl is the modern day equivalent of opium, and we are the target in the fentanyl war, just as China was the target in the Opium War. And as I told you before, these people are not too bright. They don't change their tactics. Once they come up with some scheme and it succeeds, they keep reiterating it. They keep repeating it. They may pause for a couple hundred years, even 500, 1,500 years. And then they'll go up in the attic and they'll run around in their sea chest of dirty tricks. And they'll find some old shtick that they got away with, and they'll replay it in modern times. We're seeing the same thing with the quote-unquote Justinian deception, which was a denigration and impersonation scheme that was brought about by the Emperor Justinian, a Roman emperor, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and yet they're trying to replay it now as parse syntax. Okay, so they let these things kind of go silent after they've been opposed and suppressed, and then they wait. And at a certain point in the future, they bring it back again and see if they can fool us a second or third or fourth or fifth time, using the same fraud, using the same excuses, using the same, but the current generation doesn't know, because nobody's left alive who remembers back when. And this is how they're getting away with it. So, people say to me, well, what about Russell Gould? And what about, his partner, David Wynn Miller? Go on YouTube and look up Romley Stewart and the Justinian deception. And you will see that this was a denigration scheme. It was an effort to use a labeling system to identify people who were slaves, as apart from people who were subject to peonage, as opposed to people who were free men and women. And what you will discover will be very, very important to you if you have to deal with that particular scam. Because you will quickly discover that anyone whose name appears in all capital letters is automatically designated as a slave. It doesn't matter how you're trying to reinterpret this. It doesn't matter if you have a colon or a semicolon between your first and middle name and your last name, or whether you use just your first name and your last name. All that stuff does not matter. They've set up a labeling system, and if your name appears in all capital letters, it's understood to be a corporation or to be a slave or to be in some way denigrated to the lowest possible rung on the ladder. So why in the world would you ever agree to be represented as a slave? All this stuff is just fraud. And it generally falls under the classification of impersonation. Now, when we think about impersonation, we think about impersonating a judge or impersonating an army officer or impersonating a police officer. We think about somebody impersonating some sort of an elected or appointed official, right? It doesn't have to be. It can be an impersonation of you. It can be an impersonation of who you are and what your political status is and what your obligations are, everything, okay? And that's what they've done. They've stolen your identity and impersonated you as something and someone else entirely using your name. So you are given the name Anna Maria Riezinger, right? That happens to be at least part of my given name that my parents gave me. And it was a gift to me. It was a gift, a material gift, just like you might give your child a bicycle or a chest of drawers, okay? It's a material gift that your parents gave you. Well, we know that this means me, right? That is the label, that is the name that I was given and that has been used to reference me since I was born. But what if there's some other Anna Maria Riezinger somewhere in the world? And let's say that she's Nigerian and she's 6 feet tall and she's black. Okay? Can she impersonate me? This is the sort of thing that the American Bar Association and the International Bar Association have used as a means to defraud and denigrate you and everybody that has been subject to this scheme that it's impacted most of the world. It's impacted the United States. It's impacted all of the former Commonwealth countries. It has impacted 17 countries in Western Europe. It has impacted Japan, the Philippines, every country that has been invaded and that has suffered incursions from this same mercenary organization operating as the United States of America Incorporated or operating as the USA.
Welcome to Alaska winter with the snowstorms. I do apologize for Anna being cut off suddenly, but I guess it's just our luck up here in Alaska. She should be back with us shortly. Welcome back, Anna. About 2 minutes that time.
Okay, my point to you is that you're suffering personage crimes. They're called personage crimes. And it includes impersonation, something misrepresenting you or pretending to be you that you're not. And it also includes crimes of barratry, where someone knows full well that you are not a British warrant officer lost at sea and are not a Roman municipal corporation, but nonetheless go into a court and pretend that you are. That's barratry. That's a crime of barratry. And all of these lawyers and all of these attorneys that you have known all your life have one way or another been involved in a scheme to denigrate you to the status of a British subject, first and foremost, and secondarily, to denigrate you to the status of a Roman slave. And they have misrepresented you and misrepresented your interests, and they have generally been just carrying on this rampage of personage and barratry that has enriched them tremendously and has allowed them to take certain positions legally but not lawfully to control you and to coerce you and to steal from you and to illegally confiscate your assets. And this is what we're dealing with. The International Bar Association controls the American Bar Association, and the American Bar Association owns a preponderant interest in all the Fortune 500 companies, in all of the maritime banks, and in the land assets of this country based on the false assumption that you are a British subject.
We lost her again, folks. Okay, let me see if I can raise her on the phone, everybody. Only about 30 seconds that time. We may want to call this one a bit early tonight with all the problems we're having from the snow.
Absolutely, Shannon. Yeah, they have done this. The International Bar Association, which is in control of the American Bar Association, which is in charge of the Northern Trust, which is the de facto owner of most of the land in this country now, as a result of misrepresentation of you as a British citizen, or British subject, I should say, is a major issue. They used their position of trust and acted under color of law to promote all of this for their own benefit. And so, for example, if you have a mortgage with Bank of America and you realize that you were not given all of the information, that you did not have full disclosure about the nature and the parties to this agreement before you signed it, and you object to it on that basis because it was fraudulently misrepresented, then the very judge that is sitting on the case is a person who has a conflict of interest about 40 miles wide because he's also the owner of Bank of America. So this now explains why you have a 96% conviction rate in these courts. This explains why these commercial courts are operating in a criminal fashion. It explains why they need to be shut down and why their actions need to be exonerated and why people need to be restored and to have restitution for the crimes that have been committed against them. Anyway, I hope I managed to get some worthwhile information out to you tonight. Please keep track of the new articles that are being published almost daily. Please keep your ears to the ground and keep watching alternative news sources. Not all alternative news sources are true. You're going to have to use your discernment. You're going to have to try your best to confirm information from multiple sources. We're all in the same boat as far as that's concerned. So, turn your shinola sensors on high and carry on and try to do your very best to find the truth and sift through it and discern the different motivations which are in play now. We, meanwhile, are plodding forward and making progress so that we are now unleashing a unique currency and monetary product, which we are calling the heritage dollar. And the heritage dollar will represent your prepaid credit entering the marketplace. Now, this is a real game changer. This is the game changer in the world monetary market. It is the missing link between credit and asset-backed currencies, and it is also effective worldwide, which is another big game changer. The asset-backed currencies have been sequestered on one side, and the credit-backed currencies have been sequestered on another side, but prepaid credit is that chimera that exists between two worlds. And the reason I say this is that prepaid credit is credit, right? But it is credit that has already been paid for by services and actual goods. So prepaid credit occupies a position between two worlds. It occupies a position in that it is asset-backed. It's already been paid for with actual services and actual goods. And at the same time, it communicates with the realm of credit. Now, you're all already familiar with gift cards. You can go to a Walmart or some other vendor, and you can choose a gift card, and you can put a balance on that gift card and give it as a gift to your friend, and your friend can then go to Subway and use that gift card to buy Subway sandwiches, right? Well, in a larger venue, a much larger venue, the heritage dollar allows you to do the same thing. It is a prepaid credit that you can then exercise to buy goods and services. And why is that true? It's because it's already been paid in goods and services. Thus, it is an asset-backed currency on one hand, and at the same time, it's interpreted as a credit. This is the missing link between the two worlds of asset-backed and credit instruments. And we have just launched the heritage dollar on a one-to-one basis against the debt represented by the Federal Reserve note. Now, a lot of people are, because I use that word against, what that means is that it's bringing the accounts into balance. The books have never been balanced in over 100 years. So you have a vast amount of prepaid credit on this side, you have a vast amount of debt on this side, and we are bringing the credit ledgers back together. This does not harm the Federal Reserve note. In fact, it helps the Federal Reserve note because it collapses the national debt that they're holding. Okay? So the heritage dollar collapses their national debt, the British territorial national debt. At the same time, that it extracts the value back to the benefit of the living people it's owed to. So do not interpret this as any sort of thing like a financial war or something that's being done to harm someone. It's not. But it is extracting the value that's owed to you for your benefit, and it is collapsing their national debt at the same time. So look forward to getting distributions of the heritage dollar into your credit accounts. Because even though this is an asset-backed currency that has been prepaid with actual commodities and actual services, it is also a credit instrument that can be used to buy, sell, and function within the commercial credit system. Now, those of you who have accounts with Global Family Bank will now be seeing a distribution of American Federation dollars, and you'll be seeing a distribution of heritage dollars. So what's the difference? Well, obviously, they're two different coins, right? One is a gold coin used in a gold system. One is a gift coin used in a gift system. Both of them spend. Both of them have a basis in reality. Both of them are liquid funds in that a debt converted into a prepaid credit must be honored. So you'll have both the American Federation dollar and you'll have the heritage dollar. The heritage dollar is money that is owed to you because of money that was illegally and immorally extracted from your parents, your great-grandparents, and for 6 generations into the past that shouldn't have been paid out by them. It represents the goods and the services that they were cheated out of. Let's just be blunt about this. Plus interest. And it will be a currency that has a world market rather than just a national market, because everybody has suffered the same thing. Everyone who's been touched by the British Empire in the last 160 years has suffered the same losses and problems and denigration and defrauding that we have suffered. And so it's not just an American issue, it's a global issue. And the heritage dollars represent the money that is owed to the people of this country and the world. And it also represents essentially a mini hedge fund, in that it is a truly global currency, so that say India has a bad rice crop and its overall value is affected by this. Well, at the same time, Germany is having a bumper year of car sales, so its economy is up. The Harmony coin adjusts for that. The Harmony coin value is going to provide a mini hedge fund, so that if your particular country is suffering economic problems, it will be balanced out by all the countries that are actually having good years. And we're looking forward to the introduction of the heritage dollar, I should say, as this kind of balancing and harmonious element that is otherwise missing in the world financial structure. This is our invention. This is our answer to a desperate need to be able to balance the books, to pay off the debts, and to bring a degree of rationality and fairness and intelligence to bear on an otherwise intractable problem where the debt is being tracked, but the credit is not. So now we have an answer to that, and it's the heritage dollar, and you will be receiving both American Federation dollars as Americans, and you will be receiving heritage dollars as a payback for all of the goods and services that were already extracted from you and 6 generations of your ancestors. That's why it's called a heritage dollar. Anyway, when you look at your global family bank accounts, you'll be seeing that you have AFD and you have heritage dollars, both. And that's what's going on. That's what the difference is. All right, guys, I think that with all the snow problems that we're having, I better wrap it up there and say goodnight. God bless. Our thoughts and our love are always with all of you. And go out there and have a good week. Make it count.
All right. I'll see you tomorrow, boss, and see all of you next week.
Good night.